The story recorded in Genesis 34 verses 1 to 31 is one of the most intense and difficult narratives in the book of Genesis. It does not speak only about an isolated event in the life of Jacob's family, but reveals something deeper about human nature, about honor, about pain, and about how decisions made in moments of strong emotion can trigger consequences far beyond what we imagine. To understand this story, we need to picture the context. Jacob and his family had returned to the land of Canaan after many years away. They were living near the city of Shechem, a region inhabited by Canaanite peoples. It was a place where different cultures met, and where Jacob's family, although protected by God, was still considered foreign. It is in this setting that the account begins by saying, "Now Dinah, the daughter Leah had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the land." Genesis 34 verse 1. This small verse opens the door to the entire narrative. Dinah was the only daughter mentioned among Jacob's children. We can imagine a young woman, curious and eager to meet other people, to see how the women of that place lived, to talk with them, and to observe customs different from those of her own family. There was nothing unusual about that. The desire to explore the world around us is deeply human. However, on that day something would happen that would change the course of her family's story. The text continues by saying that Shechem, the son of Hamor, an important leader in that region, saw Dinah. The Bible describes that he took a very wrong and disrespectful action toward her. The account does not go into details, but makes it clear that Dinah was treated in a humiliating and unjust way. The biblical narrative does not attempt to soften what happened. On the contrary, it makes clear that it was something serious. But soon after, something occurs that makes the situation even more complex. Verse 3 says, "His soul was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her." In other words, after acting wrongly, Shechem claimed to have developed feelings for her and desired to marry her. Then he asked his father, "Give me this young woman as my wife." Genesis 34 verse 4. This sequence of events presents a morally confusing situation. First, there was a great injustice, and then an attempt to transform it into a formal relationship through marriage. At that time, marriage alliances were often used to resolve conflicts between families or tribes. For this reason, Hamor, Shechem's father, went to speak with Jacob. Meanwhile, the text says that Jacob heard about what had happened, but remained silent until his sons returned from the field. This detail is interesting. Jacob's silence raises many questions. Was he trying to reflect before reacting? Was he waiting to hear his sons? Or was he too shocked to respond immediately? The text does not directly answer, but it shows that the news brought tension to the family. When Hamor came to speak with Jacob, he proposed something that went far beyond a simple marriage. He suggested that the two families become one people. He said they could intermarry, live in the same land, trade together, and prosper together. In other words, he was proposing a complete integration between Jacob's family and the inhabitants of the region. Shechem, for his part, showed even more interest in marrying Dinah. He said something remarkable. "Ask me for a very high bride price and gift, and I will give whatever you say to me. Just give me the young woman as my wife." Genesis 34 verse 12. This shows he was willing to pay any dowry that was requested. But the problem was not money. The issue was much deeper. Something serious had happened, and Jacob's family needed to decide how to respond. When Jacob's sons returned from the field and heard what had happened, their reaction was immediate and intense. The text says they were deeply distressed and very angry, because what had happened was considered a great disgrace. In that culture, family honor was extremely important. For them, what had been done to Dinah was not only an offense against her, but against the entire family. However, instead of seeking a solution based on wisdom, two of the brothers, Simeon and Levi, began to secretly plan something. They answered Hamor and Shechem with words that seemed conciliatory. They said there was only one condition for the marriage to take place. All the men of the city had to be circumcised. Circumcision was the sign of the covenant God had made with Abraham and his descendants. It was a deeply spiritual symbol. For that reason, Using that sign as part of a plan for revenge already showed that something was wrong. Even so, Hamor and Shechem accepted the condition. They returned to their city and convinced the men to agree to the proposal. The argument they used was that this alliance would bring prosperity to everyone. They said that the flocks and wealth of Jacob's family could become part of the city's riches. So all the men agreed and were circumcised. But 3 days later, while they were still weak from the procedure, Simeon and Levi carried out their plan. The Bible says they entered the city and attacked the men. They killed Shechem, Hamor, and many others. Then they took Dinah out of Shechem's house and left. The story, however, does not end there. The other sons of Jacob also participated in plundering the city. They took flocks, goods, clothing, and everything they found. They even took people as captives. What began as indignation because of an injustice turned into even greater violence. When Jacob saw what his sons had done, he became deeply troubled. He said, "You have brought trouble on me by making me obnoxious to the inhabitants of the land." Genesis 34 verse 30. Jacob was thinking about the consequences. They were few in number and surrounded by larger peoples. An act of revenge like that could provoke a devastating reaction against his family. But the sons responded with a question that reveals their feelings. Should he have treated our sister like a prostitute? Genesis 34 verse 31. This question closes the chapter, but it leaves something echoing in the mind of anyone who reads the story, because it makes us reflect on something profound. How should we respond when injustice happens? The brothers' indignation was understandable. They wanted to defend their sister's honor, but the way they chose to act brought even more violence and suffering. This narrative shows that pain and anger can lead people to impulsive decisions that may seem justified in the moment, but end up creating even more serious consequences. This story also reveals something important about the value of human dignity. What happened to Dinah was a great wrong. The Bible does not attempt to hide that. On the contrary, it records the pain of that moment openly. At the same time, the account also shows that responding to injustice with more injustice does not solve the problem. Instead, it often expands a cycle of suffering. When we look at this story, many questions naturally arise. How do we react when someone deeply hurts us? Can we control our anger, or do we allow it to determine our decisions? Do we think about the consequences of our actions, or do we simply react in the heat of the moment? These questions are important because they reveal something about our own lives. All of us, at some point, face unjust situations. All of us have felt indignation in the face of something wrong, but the way we choose to respond can define what happens next. Interestingly, many years later, when Jacob was near the end of his life, he mentioned this very episode when speaking about his sons Simeon and Levi. He said that their anger had been violent and that their actions had been dangerous. This shows that the events of that day deeply marked the history of the family. The consequences did not disappear quickly. Genesis 34 is a difficult narrative, but it contains profound lessons. It shows that the Bible does not hide the darker moments of human history. It presents real people with real emotions, facing extremely complex situations. And by observing these stories, we can learn something important about life. Respect for human dignity is essential. Anger must be controlled before it turns into something destructive. And decisions made in the heat of emotion can generate consequences that last for a long time. Perhaps the most important reflection from this story is this. When we face injustice, what kind of person do we choose to be? Someone who responds with wisdom and balance, or someone who allows anger to determine the next step? The story of Dinah reminds us that difficult moments reveal who we truly are. And often, it is precisely in those moments that our choices have the power to shape the future.
If this story spoke to your heart, don't stop here. Subscribe to the channel and follow every chapter of the Bible told as powerful, easy to understand stories. Leave a like, share with someone who needs to hear this message, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episodes. See you in the next chapter.